Baldur's Gate 3 as we know it is an incredible success. It set records, it's dominated sales charts and active players. It swept or nearly swept at several award shows and has become a cultural phenomenon that has caused some dev panic about their games being, well, compared to Baldur's Gate 3. But there's one critical piece, one that people are still complaining about months and months after launch. Something that I think if they had not gone this way, if Larian hadn't made the decision to do this in Baldur's Gate 3, the game could have even failed out of the gate. That decision was turn-based combat. Now at this point, it kind of feels synonymous to have turn-based combat with Baldur's Gate 3, but I think there was a lot of angst and concern about how it would work out because, well, it wasn't real-time pause combat, something that had been done in the series before, something that other CRPGs had done to great success like Dragon Age Origins. And then there's also, of course, the people that want something a bit more, let's call it action-oriented, a bit more Spider-Man. But there's a couple reasons why turn-based combat was so important and such a good decision for Baldur's Gate 3. One of them I think is very difficult to argue, and the rest are probably more of my opinion. But let's get into them. The first and perhaps most important reason is simply that turn-based combat was how Larian had been successful. It was, in a sense, what they were known for. It was something they honed with their Divinity games, and why the combat feels in many ways so similar to their prior titles, though I'd argue it's been refined with the addition of some of the rule sets in D&D 5e for Baldur's Gate 3, as well as of course just Larian's own experience. If Baldur's Gate 3 was going to be anything but turn-based, it would have needed a different studio to make the game. Telling a studio that is known for making a specific type of game to make something different is a recipe for disaster. It forces the studio to do backflips to unlearn and relearn how to do things. It's not that it's impossible to do so, and many developers are talented in various gameplay styles, art styles, and so much more, including those at Larian, but why would you take the strength of a developer and say, we don't want that, we want you to do this? It doesn't make any logical sense. If Larian was going to develop Baldur's Gate 3, it was kind of a no-brainer that it would be turn-based combat. And this game was already going to be a mammoth undertaking, something that you don't want to add extra complication to. I mean, it's a beloved franchise, and this game was hotly anticipated by the fans of that genre and the fans of that franchise. You know, I suppose this could be kind of taken into some of my concerns that I have like kind of percolating for Fable, because Fable is kind of being made by like an unexpected studio, but that's a different video. We don't have enough details on it yet. The next reason is more loosely tied to the game itself and only works as a function of the first reason. The game that Larian made puts your decision making front and center in every conversation. After playing over 200 hours of Baldur's Gate 3, I don't think it's too big of a stretch to say conversation itself can often feel like a form of combat, turn-based combat. Diplomacy or the lack thereof can often lead to different outcomes. Fights avoided or started, or even gaining or losing allies through careful choice of text options. And of course, dice rolls. There are so many things within BG3 that you need to pause to consider. It's a slower paced game by design, and the fact that the combat matches the tone and pace of the dialogue just kind of works. You just smoothly flow from tactical tongue wagging into turn-based sword fighting. And holy fuck, if that doesn't sound just kind of weird and awkward, or maybe my brain is just broken by the internet, I don't know. If I went from having a long, drawn-out and emotional conversation with Shadowheart about her past, complete with undertones and subplots, right into quick action-based combat with the Minotaur that had, you know, time-based actions that I had to complete.
I've never felt that way before. It's difficult to put into words.
It might feel just a little bit disjointed. Not impossible, but it wouldn't be as smooth. But like I said at the outset, I know that most people that were bringing up combat weren't actually wanting Spider-Man 2. They're leaning more toward what prior BG games had and what another excellent RPG like Dragon Age Origins had. Real-time pause. And I definitely see how this could work on a basic level. But you'd lose a lot of the control because everything is so impactful. Each individual action has huge weight, especially when you consider the next point. This is built on D&D 5e, and it follows it rather closely with, of course, some additions and changes, but from spell slots to dice rolls to classes and locations, Dungeons & Dragons is turn-based, so I'd argue that turn-based combat replicated in an RPG based on D&D is best suited to said turn-based combat, if they're trying to replicate the same feeling of a campaign around a table where each moment is very impactful. Something that you really do feel when playing Baldur's Gate 3 in, like, say, multiplayer honor mode. Now, don't get me wrong, I love real-time pause combat. I think it is a fantastic combat system, and it kind of threads the needle. You can still have impactful decisions with it while also speeding up gameplay a little bit. I felt like it worked incredibly well with Dragon Age Origins, but I really liked the patient control of Baldur's Gate 3 that made me think about what spell slots I was going to use and how I was going to utilize my movement, and how it really just felt like every decision I made was impactful. And yes, that does slow the game down a bit, and especially doing it by one player to another player to another player instead of setting up tactics for your whole party to run. But it also made me better understand and appreciate each of the companions that I was playing with. But then we have to go back to the first reason. If this game had been made by BioWare, okay, like old BioWare, then perhaps then you might be able to convince me that, hey, no, actually, this real-time combat, this is probably like a better way to go about it. But that's not what happened. We had Larian. And so getting them to remake it into real-time pause when they'd spent years and years honing and perfecting turn-based, even though it's somewhat close, you're still going to have issues that pop up. I mean, just think about how you would have to try and reconfigure the system to work with tactics so that you have AI working for all of your companions. I mean, shit, Baldur's Gate 3 is a lot of things, but the AI of your companions is not one of the things that I've found to be very good. How many times have you had to go find Astarion because they got lost and didn't continue following you, or Karlach, or Gale? It's always Gale. It was always Gale, normally because they couldn't jump. They didn't have enough strength.
There's room for adventure, but no room for me, it seems. You have your fair share of followers already.
But all of this is just my opinion, and so I want to hear from you. Do you think that Baldur's Gate 3 would have been as successful as it is now with a different style of combat? Do you wish it would have had real-time pause or something more action-oriented? Something more along the lines of, let's say, God of War, or even something like Witcher 3? Please let us know, because I really want to know what you have to say. Thank you so much for watching. My name is Flynn, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.